This is the story of how an abandoned girl, trapped in darkness, loneliness, and hopelessness, broke free and went on to influence the lives of millions of people around the world. Today's story is called Painful Steps.
Welcome to The Story. In this season of The Story, we highlight 8 individuals who underwent radical personal transformations to better serve themselves, their loved ones, and civilization. And now, on to the story.
The doctor and the nurse descended the dark stairway. "That's odd," said the doctor. "She usually screams when anyone walks down the steps." "Well, it's like I've been saying. She's getting better," said the nurse. "We'll see about that." At the bottom of the steps, the doctor and the nurse approached the girl's cell. "Hello," the doctor called out. "Nurse Emily says you've been doing better." The girl moved toward the bars and said, "Yes, doctor." "If we allow you back upstairs, will there be any more fits?" asked the doctor. "No, sir. Nurse Emily has been reading to me, and I can sit still now." "Very well. Bring her upstairs." The doctor handed the nurse the cell keys and left. The sound of his steps faded into the distance, and the girl's hand reached through the bars. The old nurse smiled and clutched the small, trembling hand. "What if I have a fit again?" asked the girl. The nurse turned the key and opened the door. "You won't, dear," said the nurse. "Now come with me and listen carefully. In a few days, men will be coming here who have connections to a local school for people like you. When they come, I'll lead you to them, and you introduce yourself and ask for admittance." "Like we've been practicing?" asked the girl. The old nurse smiled. "Exactly like we've been practicing," she said. The two of them walked out of the basement and into the light. The visitors finally arrived. The young girl followed them around most of the day and finally worked up her nerve to approach them. At the right moment, she tugged on the coattails of one man and said, "I want to go to school." That day would change the trajectory of her life forever. It was hard to see any potential through the horrible circumstances that led the girl to be caged like an animal in a cell in the basement of a mental institution. Her life had never been easy. She was born to illiterate parents who had fled Ireland for America during the Great Famine. At 5 years old, she developed a painful eye infection that would render her almost blind. Then the girl's mother died a few years later. Her father struggled to figure out how to both financially support and care for his 2 young children in a strange country. Unable to cope, he eventually abandoned the girl and her younger brother, Jimmy. The girl and Jimmy were sent to a local almshouse, which was a poorhouse that also served as a mental institution. The facility was dilapidated and overcrowded. Just 2 months after they arrived, Jimmy died, and she was left all alone with searing pain in her eyes that no longer worked. Fits of rage from the pain, loss, and confusion caused the doctor to place her in a basement cell. But a single elderly nurse took notice of her and decided that with love, cookies, and reading, the nearly blind girl could find purpose in her life. Life at the boarding school was no cakewalk for a blind girl coming from the almshouse. She was 14, but couldn't read or write. She owned a single set of clothes that were never washed. She didn't even own a hairbrush. Most of the girls at the school for the blind came from wealthy homes. They picked up on her ignorance, her poor manners, and her shoddy appearance, and teased her mercilessly. Most of her teachers were worse. But the girl was determined to endure the humiliation. Unlike the students weakened by comfort, she knew she could handle anything. And this was bad, but it was heaven compared to a cell in a basement. When she did feel frustration and anger, she channeled them into her studies and work. While there, school officials arranged for surgery on her eyes, which dramatically improved her vision. After regaining her sight, the first thing she did was practice reading. Despite a quick temper and a razor-sharp tongue, Several teachers and staff members eventually took an interest in her progress and started to help. She ended up graduating valedictorian. Shortly after completing school, her former headmaster received a letter from Alabama. It was from a couple who were desperate to help their daughter, who was both blind and deaf. The father pleaded with her director to send a teacher. He recommended the girl who had recently graduated as valedictorian. When she heard, the girl was torn. She wanted to help, but wondered if she could. She thought back to those who had thrown her a lifeline: the old nurse at the almshouse, teachers at the school, and an elderly woman who was deaf and blind. Those people were the only reason she was here today, and not trapped in a basement cell. The girl's own words re-entered her mind, words that she had delivered in her valedictory address. She had said, "Fellow graduates, duty bids us go forth into active life. Let us go cheerfully, hopefully, and earnestly, and set ourselves to find our especial part. When we have found it, willingly and faithfully perform it." Was teaching this young girl her special part to play in life? Could she willingly and faithfully perform it? The girl stopped wondering and sprung into action. She boarded a train and embarked on a journey that would forever change the arc of her life. As she stepped off the train in Tuscumbia, Alabama, a sharply dressed man approached her and introduced himself. He and his wife were desperate, and no one had been able to teach their daughter. She gave him a shaky nod and decided that if anyone could help the young girl, it was her. Her first weeks trying to teach the young girl didn't go well. The young girl resisted the teacher and her efforts to help. She fought her, hit her, threw things, screamed. Exhausted, the teacher cried herself to sleep each night. At first, she was frustrated, and then she realized the little girl was in that same dark prison that she had been in as a child. She knew the exact formula she used to escape it, and she knew it would work for others. A month in, she was helping to wash the young girl's hands. While pouring water over her hands, she, again, used her fingers to spell WATER into the young girl's hand. The young girl seemed to understand. In a frenzy, the young girl dragged the teacher through the house, pointing and grasping at items. With each one, the teacher fingerspelled what they were to the young girl. When the girl asked, "Who are you?" the teacher was ready and fingerspelled her name, Anne. Anne Sullivan had broken through to her most famous pupil, Helen Keller. The two of them went on to provide inspiration to millions of people trapped by biological and genetic fate. For Helen Keller, it all started with Anne Sullivan, a teacher determined to pass a spark of hope, life, and communication to someone who had fallen through society's cracks. She wanted to pass a spark similar to the one she had received. The name of the nurse who chose to love and nurture Anne is forgotten, but the transformative effects of her actions are not. She rescued a girl who had been left for dead in a basement cell. That special nurse planted a seed of love, acceptance, and kindness that would transform the world and, ultimately, offer hope to millions. It's likely that the nurse never imagined the end effects of her efforts. But her goal was never to change the whole world. Her goal was to change one girl's world. One girl who had been dealt a rotten hand in life. One girl who desperately needed love and kindness. It only takes a single spark of kindness to transform another person's life, which can ripple out around the globe. That love and energy can be passed throughout the world to break down walls, soften hearts, and lift people up. Every mind you encounter is an opportunity to pass that spark. So don't focus on shaping and changing the world all at once. A movement commences with one small act directed to help one person at a time. You can start today with one person you meet. You can encourage them, have extra patience, and even speak vision into their lives. As Anne reminds us, people seldom see the halting and painful steps by which the most insignificant success is achieved. Others are fighting a battle that we don't know much about, so when in doubt, think kind thoughts, give others the benefit of the doubt, and ask how you can help. You never know where your single act of love today will lead to tomorrow, or in 100 years. But beware, each of us has to let go of the chains and excuses we've relied on in the past. Anne famously said that we imagine that we want to escape our selfish and commonplace existence, but we cling desperately to our chains. So don't cling to your chains or limitations. Let them go, and be the type of person that is beyond what you can currently imagine. Why? Because changing the world might be easier than we've been led to believe. A nurse, Anne, Helen, and thousands of others have proved it. If they did it with all of their limitations, then why don't you? That's her story. What's yours going to be?
The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. You can learn more at salesforce.com. The story is created by our team at mission.org, a media company and podcast network.